Hello and welcome. I'm Caroline Collins, Associate Director of Film Pittsburgh, and I am delighted to welcome you here today for this very special interview with the director of A Crime on the Bayou, Nancy Buirski. Welcome, Nancy.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your beautiful film with us. We're so pleased to be able to screen this.
It's really my pleasure.
Thank you. It's the third in a trilogy, I guess. You also directed The Rape of Recy Taylor as well as The Loving Story.
That's right.
Was it meant as a trilogy? Was this like three?
No, actually it wasn't. I did The Loving Story. I kind of started it in 2009. It came out in 2011.
Okay.
And then I made two other films in between that. And then I discovered this story of Recy Taylor in about 2015. And I just kind of sailed into that. That was before the Me Too movement, by the way.
Wow.
And then I was moving on to another project, and someone gave me the proposal for a book, which is now called Deep Delta Justice by Matt Van Meter. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know, I've kind of visited this period and these issues in these preceding films, although they're not exactly the same. There certainly was an intersection of the two. Yeah. And then actually one of my colleagues said, but if you do this one, you'll have a trilogy. So it was like, oh, well, of course I should do it. And I have to say that the way they all come together and they highlight certain themes, individually they make strong points, but together I feel like they make even stronger points. That these themes have played out in all three of these stories.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously it's a moment in history that needs this light shined on it, and you've done that with all three of them. How has that been received? I mean, have they been received as a group, or what has the feedback been on, drawing attention to it?
It has actually been noticed as a group, and not that we necessarily publicize it that way, but people seem to be seeing that. It seems to be more than coincidence that I am very interested in the civil rights struggle, in institutional racism. I'm interested in the mechanics of white supremacy, because I think that's one of the things that this film brings to light. It's not just the sentiments or the intolerance that underscores white supremacy, but how it actually works in a society. Yeah. So all of those things have interested me, but probably more important are the individuals who step up, individuals who are not out to change the world, who are not out to change history, but they stand up for what's right.
Yes.
And their narratives become our story, and in many ways a microcosm of the American story.
Absolutely. And a story that sadly still needs to be told today.
Exactly. Yeah. I hope that these individuals have become inspirations. As I said, they weren't activists. They didn't have an agenda. They were just responding to what was being done to them and what they felt they had to stand up for. They stood up for principle, and they were very brave because they took great risks.
They absolutely were. And you really illuminate that, I think, in the film, especially Gary's personal story, hearing him retell his personal story. But he essentially says that this is not, he didn't mean to be an activist. He didn't, he just wanted to do what's right. And his mom also was a real strong force in saying you need to do what's, right. This is wrong. Not do what's right, but this situation is wrong.
Stand up for yourself, do what's right. It's interesting that in all three cases, Mildred Loving, who was, part of the Loving family, and that film is about interracial marriage. Then Recy Taylor, who had been tragically gang raped in 1944. And now Gary Duncan, all three of them, their families were a big part of why they did what they did. Their mothers in particular were very strong people, and they said, no, you got to do this. They also had great faith. They were all religious people and church-going people. So it's interesting to see how their stories seem to weave together. But Gary is really a unique individual on his own. He's so strong, and is today. He believes so strongly in what he did then, and is very proud of what he did today.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like that time was so long ago, but seeing Gary in your film telling his story really, I think, brings home the fact that it was not so long ago. It's really quite surprising. It was just in the 60s.
That's right. It wasn't so long ago. And I think one of the things that this film reminds us of, because there's so many echoes of it in today's world, unfortunately,
Yes.
is that history really doesn't end. Maybe it's not even history.
Wow.
We,
Yeah.
we like to say that it's actually reality being reconsidered.
Yes, absolutely. Do you see a change on the horizon? Do you think that there's sort of a cumulative effect of people telling their stories and change coming about?
It's funny. An advisor of mine often likes to talk about things that have a loop-de-loop, like you move forward and then you move a little bit back and then you move a little bit more forward. And I think kind of that's what we're seeing,
Yeah.
that with each period of unrest, and certainly we've undergone that in the Black Lives Matter movement this year, it's become scary because you think, oh my gosh, has nothing changed? But in fact, it has changed somewhat, perhaps not enough, or else we wouldn't have that period of unrest. But there has been change, and with each one of these periods, we take a step forward. And I really do think that the Black Lives Matter movement of the last number of months has made a big difference in the way we think about racism in society, and particularly institutional racism.
Absolutely. Was that important to Gary to tell his story in this climate?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, obviously this had not, we recorded Gary and we did his interviews a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So this hadn't quite taken place, but he is very proud that this film is coming out now.
Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely. And you got to interview Richard as well, who sadly has passed just.
That's correct. But Richard Sobel is also another hero, and together, of course, they make an incredible partnership. But yes, he's very, very proud of this film.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was wonderful to see, you had the footage of him talking in 2011 and then your own footage of him talking, a couple years ago. So that was really interesting to see sort of his perspective. Obviously the story, his perspective didn't change, but it was interesting to see the passage of time there.
Yeah, it's, each one elucidates the other, but I think that there is something to be said for someone who is, when we interviewed him in his early 80s, and looking back in a way, so it becomes a little bit elegiac. He has a different perspective on things than he did in 2011.
Yes, I'm sure that's very true. And their relationship, their continuing relationship and friendship, Gary and Richard, was so touching. I loved the ending, just was so hopeful that they, had this enduring friendship.
Yeah, I agree. It's the beating heart of our film, and it has made us continue as we do all the work to put the film out in the world. That friendship continues to give us the spirit and emboldens us. It makes us very proud to have worked on this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds like something I should have ended with. And I'm sorry, I had so many more questions. I don't want to end there. I do want to ask you a little bit about, of course, about Leander Perez, who ran this parish with such an iron fist. And it was interesting at the end as well to learn that he passed just a year after the third trial. So
yes.
Fairly early on. Do you think maybe Gary's life might have been different had Perez lived and been able to keep up his?
It's a good question. I kind of think that Perez had he'd gotten the signals. I mean, he basically at the end of the day, lost 3 trials.
Yeah.
And as Richard Sobel liked to say, it was kind of a trifecta. Yeah. With all the unfair arrests that Gary suffered through, ultimately he was he was vindicated 3 times, not just once. So I think that someone like Perez probably would have seen the writing on the wall and moved on. But who's to say?
Who's to say? Exactly. Yeah. The footage of his island prison was pretty chilling. Do we know what became of that?
I don't, and thank you for asking because we will look into that.
Yeah.
But you may remember that there was a time that President Trump talked about putting up some kind of barbed wire and mosquito nets or something like that. He was talking about putting people that were not behaving the way he wanted them to behave in some kind of place like that.
Wow.
And our jaws just dropped open. We couldn't believe he was saying something that was so similar to what Perez had talked about and did.
And did. Again, history sadly repeating itself.
That's right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You use a device throughout the film that I found really beautiful and sort of fascinating, was the element of water. It began with the underwater shot. Tell us a little bit about why you chose that and what the meaning has.
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, just the idea of a swamp alone is metaphorical. It reminds you that people get trapped in these things, and you can get pulled down by a swamp. It's got a pretty negative connotation, I think. The other thing, though, is that you don't see a lot of civil rights stories taking place in Louisiana, and Louisiana offers you these unprecedented opportunities to shoot the bayous and the swamps and the kind of both beautiful and dangerous feeling surroundings that you have with those low-hanging trees. It's kind of ominous and beautiful at the same time. So we always knew we wanted to take advantage of that. And then, we felt like, oh, well, let's see if we can't shoot underwater as well. Again, a metaphorical device, but I think it works.
It absolutely worked, yes, and that beauty and danger as well was very evident when you would see this beautiful shot of water and then realize, oh my goodness, there's an alligator in there. It just sort of occurred to you after looking at it. So
yeah, and we did see plenty while we were there. Yeah.
How much time did you spend there?
Off and on. Actually, I think we were there 3 times,
okay.
and one part of our crew went another time. But you tend to be very, how can I put it, economical when you're shooting these things because it's expensive. So, there weren't that many days, but we did follow up interviews, and overall, it took a number of years to finish the film.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of historical footage, of course, that I'm sure took quite some time to research and to dig through all of that.
Well, that's part of the excitement of making these films, is finding that archival footage. I find it magical. And we have a wonderful archival producer who hunts around for it, and we do that ourselves. And, whenever you excavate something, whenever you uncover something that you didn't know you had, then it adds so much to the story. It's part of the creative process.
It truly did add so much to the story because you were able to really tell the story of the times through all of that archival footage without even really needing to say anything.
Right. Our hope is always to immerse you in that time and place. It makes you feel like you're living it a bit. And then if you have great interviews like Gary Duncan and Richard Sobel and Lois Eli and Armin Dörfner and Robert Collins, they're not just experts. They live this story.
They lived it. Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So they become important narrators. And I love to try to limit the films I work on to those kinds of people on screen.
Yeah. Well, their stories are so powerful. I love that you were able to talk with the sons of the lawyers, because that it really showed what was passed down to them. They did live it when they were, when their fathers were going through it, but to see the lessons that were passed down, I thought was very powerful as well.
I agree. And it was also very important for us to shine a light on that law firm, because as important and as heroic as Richard Sobel was, these African-American lawyers who were fighting this fight way before Richard Sobel showed up, they deserve recognition. There could be another film just on them. So we were, I think, blessed to be able to work with the sons and learn more about that struggle through that firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes me think of one other question. I know, of course, that much was made of Richard not being licensed to practice law in Louisiana. and yet he was able to represent Gary. Was it through that firm that he was able to do that? Or
yes, he was associated with Collins, Douglas, and Eli, and it wasn't unusual because this was a period of time when he wasn't alone. A number of other lawyers from other parts of the country would kind of, I don't want to say descend on, but they would join the struggle in the South and defend so many people who were being arrested for what they were calling civil rights abuses. And so they played a very, very important role. But he was one of them that got stopped by Perez and used the lack of the license as an excuse to arrest him. So he was not alone, and he was one of the few lawyers that actually stayed. Many of the lawyers would come down for 3 weeks on their vacations, and then they go back to their white shoe law firms on the East Coast. And he stayed. He left his firm and he stayed in Louisiana and continued to work there.
So such a powerful story, just a story of the friendship of these two gentlemen, and really such an important time to shine a light on again. So we're so grateful that you did, and so grateful that you shared it with us. It's really a lovely story. Thank you.
We are very honored to be part of your film festival and to share it with your film festival attendees. It's really an honor, and we hope you all like it. Please let us know. We're at A Crime on the Bayou on Facebook and Twitter.
Great.
So Augusta Films Instagram. So we'd love to hear from everybody.
Thank you. That's terrific. And we also will email surveys out to all of our viewers so we can pass along that info to you as well, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time and for your talents. And we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival, and I'll see you next time.